Hey, welcome to Common Ground, the podcast where we put aside political divides and focus on the national security threats that impact all of us. Because whether we like it or not, our adversaries don't care about our political affiliations. I'm Shane McNeil, and as always, I'm joined by my co-hosts.
Amandalynne Davis.
And Logan.
Thanks, guys. So for new listeners to the show, a brief update of how we do this. Essentially, what we are trying to do here is have a conversation about issues that hit various parts of the political spectrum and find ways that we can get both sides to see the issue in a way that makes sense to them, to basically get through some of that fighting to find ways of developing common ground. Kind of the way the title says, because we're very clever.
Exactly.
All right, so it's not going to be a long show, but we think that we're going to have some good information for you guys. Today, we're going to be talking about the weaponization of social media. Social media is not just about sharing memes and updates anymore. It's a battleground where narratives, propaganda, and influence can really shape reality. What is, objective reality, if you will, in a world where you can manipulate people's thinking by, controlling how many times something is retweeted. We've lost that kind of concept of absolute truth thanks to social media.
Yeah, I think one of the main things is that as American policy goes, Title 50 would require that you have a presidential finding, and even then it's not supposed to actually reflect back on the United States, whereas our adversaries have never held to that. So they have freedom to publish, manipulate, send, push both sides just to get everyone fighting, which then you can use for misinformation, social division, anything pretty much you want. From an election was stolen to the largest Texas should succeed Facebook page turned out to be a Russian run page, and it had more followers than the Republican and Democrat pages on Facebook. So they don't have those same constraints or guilty feelings about trying to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And especially people don't necessarily have the education on social media to understand when something is simply a meme that their friends are sharing versus when it's actually with malinfluence. I think it's really important to discuss this.
Well, Amandalynne, if it's on the internet, it's got to be true.
It's gotta
We all
be.
know that.
Gotta be.
So
If it's on Google, come on.
there's a requirement.
Yeah, I mean, I saw on the Facebook the other day that Logan was dating somebody new, so it must be.
Oh,
Must be true.
I don't know what his wife thinks
Yeah.
about that, but
Well, she's okay. Well, we're more concerned that Taylor's boyfriend's going to be upset, but it's going to be fine.
okay.
Yeah.
Understood.
So, but talking about the impact of the Russians, like you said, I remember one of the worst ones I heard about, and it was back during the Black Lives Matter issue, and there was a protest down in Houston, and Russians had set up both the protest for the Black Lives Matter issue, but they also set up the counter protest for the exact same protest. And then they proceeded to feed the Facebook groups for both sides of the protest with violent imagery and drive that psychological aspect, which we don't have our favorite doctor here with us today, but they drove that psychological aspect to create a situation where people would show up at the protest angry and feeling violent, and then surprise, the protest got violent.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and if you look at propaganda, there's three types of propaganda: black, white, and gray. The best type that you can use is gray for a lot of people's arguments, in that it's got a shred of truth, but enough that I can manipulate or twist the perception to the reality that I want. So I'm going to drive that anger, I'm going to drive that infuriation. And ideally, if I'm an outside state level actor, or even less than that now, because let's be honest, anybody can do it, my goal is to get both sides angry so there's no chance of peace or understanding between the sides.
Yeah, really driving a wedge in between it. And also not giving a platform to have these kinds of conversations of what propaganda actually looks like you said, white, gray, black. There's so many different kinds of propaganda and how it shows up. And if we don't discuss it on social media, it's just never going to be talked about.
Well, you talk about driving conversations. That's one of the interesting things about social media is it's very little of it, even though it is theoretically social, very little of it is about a conversation.
Right.
There's no room, because a conversation implies, we're sitting here, we're having a conversation, we're building out an argument, making points, backing it up with evidence. there's almost none of that on social media. If
Absolutely
you can't
none.
make your point in, I don't, it used to be 120 characters. I don't know what it is now. I'm getting too much gray, but there is no room for building evidence on social media. You have to create a situation where people are just responding to an emotional thing.
Mhm.
Right, but
Um,
that's how the software is designed. It's
yeah,
not
Exactly.
made for discourse. It's made for echo chambers and reinforcing what you want to see.
The algorithm.
Right, the algorithm does that, and then it's almost worse because it's more shocking when you see something that's outside the paradigm that you believe or support.
Mhm.
yeah. I mean, yeah, just I think the important thing people need to realize is it doesn't reflect reality, right?
Mhm.
Right.
It shapes reality, it creates that reality. So, if you're not the one controlling that narrative, then, you're not the one controlling the how things are perceived. And so to ask you guys a question to drive this, have you personally or encountered disinformation or social media manipulation? Like, have you ever actually seen like firsthand?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think I just hop onto Instagram any day and I see something. But I mean like big cases of it are things like Babylon Bee, like notorious for being a satire site. Some people don't realize that it's satire because it caters towards like a political audience as well. And so they just feed into that. Truly, they're upfront about it on their website if you go check it out. But people sharing that with the intention, that's like accidental propaganda
Mhm,
where they're driving themselves more into that echo chamber that Logan was talking
mhm.
about. I think that's the most common kind that I see, but I would be remiss if I said that I've never seen anything else that was like a doctored image or using
Okay.
AI to manipulate some current event.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even from the self-promotion level, any Instagram fit influencer is engaging in these items all the way up to, the state level actors where they change one level or one letter, or they use a mini link to get you to click that looks to a site that is almost exactly mirrored to a traditional media site. But if you actually look at it, there's nothing really there.
Mhm.
It's just gobbledygook text and the one article with no previous articles, etc. But now with AI and the fact that they've been doing this so long, they can take sites like, for instance, like a Babylon Bee site and create a legitimate looking platform where people will go to look for news, not ever
Mhm.
realizing that they're just going straight to the source.
Yeah.
Yeah, to kind of give some clarity to our listeners, I think you're talking about the thing where like you can replace an A with a Cyrillic A.
Mhm.
It looks like the same word, but
Mhm.
the computer recognizes it as a different word and sends you
Exactly.
to a
Yep.
different link.
Well, I can even edit the hyperlink,
Yeah.
right? So I can make the actual link you're going to look like whatever I want behind the scenes. But what the victim, because it's a victim operated device, what it happens is they see CNN.com, FoxNews.com, whatever, Twitter, whatever website they think they want to go to. They're never actually hitting that site. They're hitting my fake mirrored
Mhm.
site
Mm.
that shows what I want it to see.
Right.
Yeah. The one story I think in the last, 5 years that kind of stood out to me the most was there was a post a while back that went viral, and it was back during a lot of the Black Lives Matter type of stuff. But there was a police officer who had recorded a video in her car, as you do, because that's a thing. And she was going through a McDonald's drive-through. And as she was going through the drive-through, um, I guess the way that the people in the drive-through responded her made her feel unwelcome because she
Mhm.
was a police officer. So she decided not to get her food and got on her phone and recorded a video about how unsafe she feels as a police officer, and that she feels like people are out to get her because of her choice of jobs. And and the way the video was recorded, watching it from trying to be an objective viewer,
Mhm.
it kind of hit both sides of what that political argument at that time wanted to see. So
Mhm.
on the one hand, the right was looking at this and they're saying, well, look how poor and mistreated this police officer is. And look at, how badly they're treating our law enforcement and the people who put their lives on the line for us. And then on the other side of that same argument, you had the fact that this officer kind of just looked silly.
Mhm.
And looked like they were whining and complaining about something when nothing had legitimately happened to them in that moment, and they looked bad, and they made law enforcement look bad.
Mhm.
And so with one video, you have managed to capture both sides of the political spectrum in a way that would allow them both to make their points with one by sharing one video, and that video then went on to go viral, right? Well, the interesting thing, if you just spent a couple of minutes digging into how that video actually went viral, and I remember actually going back and looking at the tweets for, I think it was Fox and MSNBC and a couple of the other major news networks, that they linked to the pages that initially tweeted this. And every one of those pages had been created in the last couple of years. Every one of those pages, all of a sudden, within like 2 years, had 60,000 followers, had 40,000 plus people they were following. Every single one of those had an additional 60,000, and
Mhm.
they all almost entirely tweeted about politics, and they almost entirely tweeted about things that were controversial. And it only took a couple of minutes to start looking at this and say, there is absolutely no possible way that these are real people making this go viral.
Mhm.
And yeah, maybe the cop was real, which I do think the cop turned out to be a real person,
Sure.
but they were able to find that video and say, you know what, this video hits exactly what we want. It's going to divide the country exactly the way we want to divide it. And they made that video go viral so fast that all of the news media picked up what was clearly a bot
Mhm.
propaganda tool.
Well, because all of these organizations, from the company to from the news organizations to the social media platforms, they're all for-profit companies. The more links, the more clicks, the more views, the more revenue they make in driving ads and getting your personal information to sell. But aside from that, what I want to bring up is the fact that that video going viral then reinforced to both sides that their actions were justified and should continue again.
Mm.
So then you may actually see whether she was or not, or the police officer was or not, I don't know, but you're going to see more people treating police officers that way. Then you're going to see more police officers making videos. Just like my favorite pet peeve is veteran videos in a car. Like, go in a room if you've got something to say, but don't just sit in your car and tweet about it or video about it. It drives me crazy. But as the popularity alone, let alone the monetary value, can drive that to encourage people to mimic it.
I don't know. Amandalynne was telling me her favorite like Friday evening thing is to make a cup of tea and watch Angry Men in a Car videos.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wait, did you not know that about me?
No, I didn't.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, so
Yeah,
yes, this is
now I
true.
know. Right. Mhm.
So, we've talked a little bit about, the issues with, of course, we all know China and Russia. It wasn't that long ago, though, that terrorist groups like ISIS were the primary threat that we were concerned about on social media. And that, we quickly moved past ISIS, and then we moved into the Russian propaganda and the election issues in 2016.
Mhm.
Today we've gone into deep fakes and AI generated content and all
Mhm.
of that. And it just seems like every couple of years it gets worse and worse, and the problem grows. So, do you guys think that social media platforms have anything to do with any role in stopping this? Like, are they purely there for freedom of speech and you can say anything you want, or do they have a responsibility to do something about this as well?
Ooh, what a big question. I feel like if they are actively engaging with it and profiting off of it, there's some sort of regulation that has to be had. But there's another part of me, and I think it comes in a little stronger. They really can't regulate that. If they are priding themselves on being a platform for people to have free discussion, then they can't really limit it too much. It gets tricky. I think it's in a gray zone right now, and I can't say for certain where I stand 100%. I'll be interested to hear y'all's opinion to kind of help inform mine, because this has been a debate in my head since being on social media, especially with the presence of deepfakes, because they're so dangerous, and that's clear, that's obvious. But where's the line of freedom of speech online, especially whenever people internationally are on these platforms?
Yeah. So At the end of the day, these are for-profit companies that are exactly what you said. They're platforms. Their desire, their drive, their responsibility to their shareholders and their organization is for participation on a purely non-emotional side. That is their responsibility, is profits. They don't have a responsibility to filter to anyone. Now that you can get into with what kind of platform do you want to be?
Right.
But I would argue the majority of people don't bother to do 2 minutes of research, so they don't care.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, their job is produce profits and drive revenue, not police. And furthermore, I don't think it's possible.
Yeah.
I do not think that it
What
is
a big
possible
challenge it
for
would be.
them to control at that level, or they would. But also, why would they want to when Russia and China are pumping millions of dollars, political parties are pumping millions of dollars, private investors are pumping millions of dollars. Now you've got billionaires entering political cycles where they're paying for things that we didn't see before. If my job is to raise my stock value, yeah, sorry, leave the morality
I
out of
totally
it.
agree with that. Like I completely understand that perspective, and that's why it's such a battle, because being online and seeing it,
Mhm.
it's easy to tell, like, okay, this is horrendous and this
Yeah.
might have really dire impacts on us. But like you said, who am I to say that that CEO needs to abide by that law? What if they don't even operate in the country? There's so many factors that go into it,
Yeah.
and putting that responsibility onto them really, I really struggle, because if we're asking to put that responsibility on them, then we also have to follow up with, what's that responsibility? Where is that line drawn? And when is it overstepping on that demand?
That's the hard conversation, is where's the difference between, as a former marketing guy, marketing and propaganda are very, very, I'm selling you a product.
Mm-hmm.
I've told you as a little kid, these little rockets shoot out of this guy. When you got it, you open the package, it definitely didn't shoot.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, marketing is so close to propaganda. And let me be clear, like, morality me absolutely wishes they would do something about it
Right.
and fix it. I'm not sure that when you talk about corporations that you can apply morality to.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways you can, right? But I'm not sure that you can expect them to really stop it.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting point because these are corporations. But at the same time, we've seen that today most people get their news from social media. And other organizations that are corporations, Fox News, CNN, the Washington Post, the Guardian,
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
they are held to a standard of being able to back up the things they say.
Right.
And because we say that that is where people get their news from, and they need, and freedom of the press also means that people need to be able to trust the press.
Mm-hmm.
So if the majority of people are now getting their news from these sites, and that's where people are learning their version of the truth, because apparently, I hate to use the term post-truth, but we are all in. I hate that term. I really do. But I don't know that there's a better term for it when we live in a world where defining truth is almost impossible.
Right.
But that's where people are getting their information. And if this were the print media or television media, or even like the internet media, but on a non-social network site, those companies, those corporations would be held to a standard of having to back up the things they say.
Mm-hmm.
But because they project themselves as a social media site and not a news site, they're able to say, well, you can come on here, you can get your news, but at the same time, you can say anything you want and say that it's truth. And knowing that people won't verify it,
Right.
you can control the narrative so much easier. And there is no way of anybody doing anything to stop it. So it seems like I don't have an answer. I want to
Mm-hmm.
clarify. I do not have the answer to this question. It's more, I'm just posing this because I want us, but I also want our audience to think about it, because it is an issue that affects everybody, no matter what side of the political spectrum they are on. Is, you know, if anybody can say anything they want and that becomes truth, Where do we draw the line?
Well, I think the challenge becomes in a, from a, I don't like people telling me what to do standpoint, especially the government being invasive. We then give the power to a organization to declare that a private company is something other than what they registered as. So let's say I decide as the US government, and we're choosing the US government because that's the closest thing I can reach to, right? Is Google is now a news organization because people Google things. Now I have reclassified what Google registered as a corporation as I see fit. Not only that, what if I take the opposition side that doesn't support my platform's news? Let's say you're one side or the other, and I say CNN's no longer a news source. Thanks. I've declared it as such because I set the regulatory right for what becomes a news organization. And that's the dangerous ground that I see with that, though. Not that I don't agree. I would love it if we could make it that controlled, but I'm not sure that I trust the government to make that distinction and leave personal advantage out of it to either party.
Honestly, I don't disagree with you. I just don't know that I know the right answer and that any of us do.
Yeah, I
No.
think it's impossible to come up with the right answer. I'm thinking right now about this isn't the US government. It was in Tanzania actually.
Mm.
On Instagram, they have news sites just like we do. Like
Mhm.
BBC has an Instagram account, and it was one of the Tanzanian news outlets, The Citizen. They had posted something online, government caught wave of it. They said, "Hey, delete it." And so there's ways of the government interacting with the social media platform and restricting what news outlets are doing without, classifying the site as a news site and distinguishing between a news platform interacting versus a civilian interacting
Mhm.
because they weren't policing what the people in the comments were saying. That
Sure.
wasn't the issue. It was the product put out.
Mhm.
And I wonder if there's something to be learned from that about the boundary of, okay, they are an Instagram account
Mhm.
of a news source, but the Instagram account doesn't give them the permission to abide solely by the social media rules. They also are held to the standard of like government and freedom of press.
That's an interesting topic for you to also bring up next week in our conversation about people's trust in media. An interesting lead in there, by the
That'll
way.
be happening.
But yeah, I mean, that is our next topic for next week is or 2 weeks from now, I guess, is what are how do we fix that trust in the media? And I want you to remember that conversation and have
Okay.
that, bring that
Jotting
up
it down,
again.
everyone.
Yeah. Um, you know, but it is an excellent point. I want to touch while we're still here on circling us back around to our fundamental thing of national security, because that's why we're all here. And talking about social media and the idea of concept of cyber war,
Mhm.
right? Um, what a lot of what we are seeing aligns to what China has said is its unconventional war methodology. And if that's the case, and China has said that this is a tactic of war, that this conversation that we are all having is talking about something that they have said is a weapon,
Mhm.
at what point do we say, well, that is cyber warfare? And is that comparing that to traditional warfare, I mean, non-kinetic operations, at what point do we say, you know what, there is a national security component to this, and yeah, the government might not have a reason to step in when it comes to certain aspects of it, but when it comes to something where we are concerned that it's a warfare tactic, does the government, certain parts of the government at least, have a responsibility to step in?
So I think they've tried in the past. The problem is nobody listens. Even when we say, like, for instance, the Texas secedes page that I talked about, it was well put out all over the media that this was a Russian fronted Facebook account to drive division in our country.
Mhm.
Nobody cared.
Yeah, I never heard of it.
And they took it down. I
Yeah.
think it was Texas United or something like that. I
Mhm.
can find it and send it to you. But nobody cared. So
Yeah.
I mean, how the American culture is so inoculated to the fact that China hacked something or China stole something data wise that no one even flinches anymore. They don't see it as what it is. It's phase zero warfare. So we need to find some way to identify it and then move forward. But it's a real challenging area. And then again, we get into the whole, do we trust the government to control what we see and hear? That's kind of counter American.
Mhm. Yeah. No, they are all excellent points. There was a great book on this that I read called Like Wars.
Yes, I read
The
that one.
weaponization of social media, and he talks about a lot of that same stuff in there. Talking about at the time the Russian page for the Tennessee GOP,
Mhm.
that the Russian page had more likes than the actual legitimate Tennessee GOP page,
Right.
because what they were putting out was more controversial, and
Absolutely.
people like controversy on
Mhm.
social media. And because the Russian Tennessee GOP page was more controversial, everybody wanted to follow that one.
Right.
And but when that came out, because it did go public, you're absolutely right. People didn't care.
Mm-mm.
There is, in realistically, the people who probably would have cared probably didn't believe it. And that's part of this issue that we're running into. When I say post-truth, which again, I hate the term, but
Mhm.
it's a situation where, I mean, we can prove that. We know it's a thing. We can prove it's a thing.
Mhm.
People just say, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do we do? I don't, yeah.
Yep.
That's a big discussion.
Mhm.
It is a big discussion, and it is a bigger one than we have time for today. So I am going to wrap this up a little bit. Logan, Amandalynne, do you guys have any last thoughts for our listeners on this topic that seemed like it was just us telling them about how the world is in a toilet?
I think the most important thing to take away from this is I think it's a reminder that when you're on social media and interacting with news platforms and anything in general, even a conversation, think twice. Is this real? Do your own research. Really look into it. Don't take anything at surface value, especially now with AI, like deepfakes. You just really never know. And I think proceeding with caution, but not to fearmonger. Just being aware that these tools are out there. They can be used to try to influence you, but you can also fight against that and be aware.
Yeah, I think for me the biggest thing is educate yourself, educate your friends. I can't tell you how many copies of Like Wars I've given to people to just get them started understanding, even as a privacy advocate, how privacy matters and how far back this goes. In the book, he goes all the way back to Lincoln when he was first receiving information. But educate yourself, educate your friends where you can, and just try not to fall for it.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I am pretty sure that between the two of us, we've probably bought about half the books that have been sold, because I keep buying the same book and then giving away, and then buying the same book and then giving it away.
See, I haven't read Like Wars. Someone's gotta let me
well,
borrow this
yeah, I'm
copy.
sure.
I
Here we
will
go.
give
I've
you
only
my,
read Meme Wars. If you haven't read Meme Wars, read that one.
I will
It's
give you
really
my
good.
latest
Yeah.
copy, and I'll buy another one.
I think the author needs to send us some signed copies.
Right?
So,
All right. Well, so we appreciate everybody joining us today. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, the next episode will be about the mistrust of the media. It has the media is not just under scrutiny, it's under siege. Trust in the news is falling. Foreign actors are spreading disinformation. AI is making it really hard for the media to know what's real and what isn't. And everybody is confused about what they should be believing, what they should be watching. So that's what we'll be talking about next time. All right, that's it for today's episode of Common Ground. If you found this discussion insightful, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We're here every other week breaking down the national security threats that impact all of us, no matter where you stand politically.
and if you liked what you heard, leave us a review. It helps more people find the show and join the conversation. Plus, we promise to read every single one, unless, of course, it's written by a bot from Beijing or a Winnie the Pooh costume.
You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Blue Sky for updates, behind the scenes content, and more ways to stay informed. Got a topic you want us to cover? Let us know. We love hearing from our listeners.
And remember, national security isn't left or right, it's about all of us. Until next time, let's find some common ground.